6 minutes, Britt said, sliding a slick folder toward me across the glass table. That's how long it took the executive committee to vote on your termination after reviewing the transition metrics. My mouth went dry. The conference room suddenly felt airless, like someone had sealed the vents. But I'm only halfway through the knowledge transfer, I managed. Britt didn't blink. She'd worn her power suit today, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, the one she reserved for firing people. Beside her, my direct supervisor Hal studied the ceiling tiles, his wedding ring spinning nervously around his finger. According to our analysis, the 6 junior analysts you've trained have already reached 87% efficiency against your benchmarks, Britt continued. The remaining gaps don't justify your salary level. 3 months of 16-hour days, 3 months of explaining 10 years' worth of institutional knowledge to fresh-faced graduates who took furious notes but couldn't possibly understand the invisible network of relationships I'd built. 3 months of maintaining my own workload while essentially doing a second full-time job. You told me this was a mentorship program, I said quietly, that we were expanding the department. Hal finally looked at me, his expression a mixture of guilt and relief. The markets shifted, Aubrey. We had to adapt. Your termination package. Britt pushed another folder toward me. 2 months severance. Today will be your last day. The security guard waiting discreetly by the door made more sense now. I stood, smoothing my skirt with hands I refused to let tremble. My team doesn't know? They'll be informed after you've cleared out your workspace, Britt said, already checking her watch. We'd appreciate your discretion during the transition. 10 years. 10 years of canceled vacations and middle-of-the-night crisis calls. 10 years of being the go-to problem solver when everything fell apart. 10 years of building the very systems they now believed anyone could run. I nodded once, gathered only my personal planner, and walked out, leaving everything else behind. The guard followed at a respectful distance as I collected my coat and purse, then escorted me through the lobby I'd entered thousands of times before. Outside, spring sunshine mocked my dazed expression. My phone buzzed, messages from my now former team about a client issue they couldn't solve. They didn't know yet that they'd never have my guidance again. I silenced the notifications, hailed a rideshare, and directed the driver to take me home. What collapsed over the next 32 days would stun even me. If you're finding this story of workplace betrayal hits close to home, you're not alone. Corporate loyalty often flows in just one direction, doesn't it? If you're enjoying this journey of how things spectacularly unraveled, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that expose the reality behind professional facades. Drop a comment about your own workplace experiences. I read every single one. Now, let's continue with what happened after I was unceremoniously shown the door. My name is Aubrey Kane. At 38, I'd spent over a decade as the Principal Solutions Coordinator at Crawford Industries, one of the largest manufacturers of specialized industrial components in the Midwest. What that title actually meant was that I was the company's professional firefighter. I designed fixes when the impossible happened. When everyone else panicked, I stayed calm. When deadlines seemed hopeless, I found pathways forward. When major clients threatened to walk, I was the one who kept them, not through manipulation or false promises, but through a deep understanding of the intricate dance between production capabilities, client needs, and the human relationships that held everything together. Growing up as the middle child of 5 in a blue-collar family taught me early how to listen beyond words, how to negotiate between competing interests, and how to fix problems with limited resources. My father repaired historical carousel mechanisms for a living, delicate, complex systems where a single misaligned gear could cause catastrophic failures. I'd spent my childhood watching him diagnose issues that baffled other mechanics, using a combination of technical knowledge, intuition, and patience. I brought those same skills to Crawford. What others saw as chaotic emergencies, I recognized as patterns. Where others saw insurmountable obstacles, I found pressure points that could be adjusted. The day after my termination, I woke at 4:38 a.m., out of habit, the time I'd risen for years to review overnight production reports before the morning meetings. My hand reached for my phone before I remembered. It wasn't my problem anymore. I made coffee, sat at my kitchen window, watched the sky lighten. For the first time in years, I had nowhere to be. By noon, my phone had 17 missed calls from various team members and 3 voicemails from Hal, each more strained than the last. I didn't return any of them. Instead, I walked to the small park 4 blocks from my apartment and sat on a bench, watching children play with their mothers. Normal people living normal lives during daytime hours. A world I'd forgotten existed. On day 3, Zoe from my former team showed up at my apartment. I'd hired her myself 2 years ago. Brilliant, earnest, with analytical skills that reminded me of myself a decade earlier. "They didn't tell us until you were gone," she said when I opened the door. "Then they split us up and assigned each of us to one of the new people. It's chaos, Aubrey." I invited her in, but didn't offer solutions. That wasn't my role anymore. "Javier already quit," she continued, pacing my living room. "He said if the company treats its best people like this, there's no future there." "Smart man," I replied, serving tea in the ceramic mugs I'd never had time to use before. "The Richardson contract is about to implode. Nobody can find the contingency plans you always had ready. They existed, detailed scenarios for dozens of potential crisis points, stored on the company's shared drive in a folder structure I'd explained repeatedly to Hal, who had deemed it unnecessarily complex and overly cautious. "I'm sure they'll figure it out," I said. Zoe looked at me strangely. "You're different. Unemployed people often are." "No, it's more than that." She studied me. "You seem lighter, like you've set something down." I had. The crushing weight of carrying an entire company's operational success on my shoulders. A burden I hadn't recognized until it was removed. Despite the shock and betrayal, despite the financial uncertainty ahead, I felt a curious sense of freedom. I didn't tell Zoe that I'd already received 3 calls from headhunters who'd heard about my sudden availability. News traveled fast in specialized industries. I didn't tell her I'd turned down 2 interviews already, needing time to consider what I actually wanted next. After Zoe left, I opened my laptop for the first time since the termination. My personal email contained 4 messages from clients I'd worked with at Crawford. The subject lines varied, but the content was essentially the same. "What happened? Are you okay? The new team doesn't understand our needs." By the end of week 1, Crawford's stock had dropped 6%. A small industry blog published a piece noting operational disruptions following personnel changes. I read it with detached interest while sitting on my balcony, drinking afternoon tea, another new luxury. Week 2 brought rain and a text from my former assistant. "Executive floor is in constant emergency meetings. Hal looks like he hasn't slept in days." I didn't respond, but found myself smiling as I prepared dinner that night, actually cooking instead of ordering delivery to eat while reviewing reports. During week 3, I began interviewing at other companies, partly out of financial necessity. Each conversation followed a similar pattern. The hiring managers would ask about my experience, then inevitably inquire, "We heard Crawford's having significant issues since your departure. What exactly did you do there?" How could I explain that what I did wasn't on any job description, that my value lay in connections and pattern recognition built over years, that I'd created systems so seamlessly functional they appeared effortless until they weren't there anymore? "I solved problems," I'd answer simply. At home that evening, my doorbell rang. A delivery person handed me a heavy gift basket with a handwritten note from Tyson Richardson himself, CEO of Crawford's largest client. "Whatever they're paying you next, we'll top it. The new team doesn't understand our production needs." I set the basket aside without opening it. My phone rang 10 minutes later, Crawford's main switchboard. I let it go to voicemail. What I didn't know then was that the Richardson contract, worth nearly 30% of Crawford's annual revenue, had just issued a formal warning letter threatening to terminate their relationship within 14 days unless specific production issues were addressed immediately. The 6 junior analysts who had supposedly reached 87% efficiency against my benchmarks were drowning. 3 had already quit. The remaining 3 were working around the clock trying to untangle systems they'd been told were simple but were discovering were built on a decade of nuanced decisions and relationships. On day 29, the industry newsletter reported that Crawford had temporarily shut down its main production line due to quality control concerns, a euphemism for a catastrophic failure in the supply chain sequencing. I'd personally overseen for years. That night, as I prepared for bed after my first serious job offer from a competitor, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Arthur Crawford. Need to speak with you urgently. Name your terms." Arthur Crawford, the grandson of the founder, current CEO, and a man who had passed me in hallways for 10 years without ever learning my name. I turned my phone off without responding. and slept better than I had in years. What I didn't know was that he would appear at my apartment building 3 days later at nearly midnight, desperate enough to bypass normal channels, pride abandoned along with shareholder confidence. What happened next would change everything, not just for me, but for the entire power structure I'd left behind. On the 32nd day after my termination, at 11:07 p.m., my apartment buzzer jolted me awake. I'd fallen asleep reading on the couch, another new freedom, letting my body rest when it needed to, instead of forcing it through another late night of work. The persistent buzzing continued. I checked my phone, 3 missed calls from the same unknown number that had texted me 3 days earlier. Arthur Crawford was nothing if not persistent. I pressed the intercom button. "Do you know what time it is?" Miss Kane. His voice sounded different than the few times I'd heard him speak at company meetings, strained, lacking the easy authority of a man born into wealth and position. "Please, I need to speak with you. It's urgent." I almost refused. The thought of going back to bed, of letting him stew in consequences of his own making, was deeply appealing, but curiosity won out. 5 minutes, I said, buzzing him in. While waiting for the elevator to bring him up, I glanced at myself in the hallway mirror. Faded university sweatpants, hair piled messily on top of my head, face bare of makeup, not my carefully maintained professional appearance. Good. When I opened the door, the sight of Arthur Crawford was almost shocking. The man whose family name graced the company letterhead, whose tailored suits and manicured appearance graced industry magazines, looked diminished. His tie hung loose around his neck, dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his normally perfect hair stuck up oddly on one side. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, voice low. I didn't invite him in immediately. "It's almost midnight. I know. I apologize." He shifted uncomfortably in my doorway. "May I come in, please?" I stepped aside, watching as he entered my modest apartment with the hesitant steps of someone entering unfamiliar territory. Which it was, a world away from his lakefront mansion and corner office with its sweeping views. I gestured toward my small kitchen table. No offer of refreshments. "You're a difficult woman to reach, Miss Kane," he began, settling awkwardly onto one of my wooden chairs. "Aubrey," I corrected. "And I've been exactly where I've always been. You never tried to reach me before." His gaze dropped briefly. "I'd deserve that. What do you want, Mr. Crawford?" "It's late, and I have a job interview tomorrow." His head snapped up. "That's actually why I'm here. I need you to come back to Crawford." I laughed, a genuine, spontaneous laugh that seemed to startle him. "You fired me 4 weeks ago. A mistake. A terrible mistake. A mistake is misplacing your keys or forgetting an appointment. Firing someone who dedicated 10 years to your company after making them train their replacements. That's a calculated decision." He leaned forward, hands clasped tightly on the table. "The board recommended the restructuring based on efficiency projections from the operations team. I signed off on it without fully understanding what you actually did for us. And now? Now we're in free fall." For the first time, real emotion cracked through his polished veneer. "Richardson is threatening to pull their contract. The Milwaukee production line has been down for 3 days. 2 other major clients have already canceled orders." I waited, watching him struggle. "The 6 analysts. They're bright, capable people, but they don't have whatever it is you do. Your integrative understanding. 3 quit already. The others are drowning." "Hal approved this restructuring?" I asked, curious about my former supervisor's role. Arthur shifted uncomfortably. He presented the plan, said your position had become redundant with the new team structure. Of course he had. Hal had been threatened by my knowledge for years, knowledge that extended beyond my official responsibilities. He'd tried repeatedly to get me to document everything I knew into systems he could control, as if a decade of relationship building and problem solving could be reduced to a procedure manual. "Hal is no longer with the company," Arthur added, watching my reaction. "Fired or resigned?" "Resigned. Yesterday, after the Richardson contract manager threatened to walk away from our 3-year renewal." I absorbed this without comment. The Richardson contract had been my baby from the beginning, a challenging client with exacting standards, but who rewarded reliability with unwavering loyalty. I'd built that relationship person by person, from the floor managers to their executive team. "What exactly do you want from me?" I asked finally. "Come back, help us stabilize, name your terms." "Why should I?" The question seemed to surprise him. Because we need you. You didn't need me 4 weeks ago. We were wrong. I stood, walking to my window. The city lights spread out below. Thousands of windows where other lives played out. Lives untouched by Crawford Industries' impending crisis. Do you know what I did the day after I was fired? I asked, without turning. He remained silent. I went to a park in the middle of the day. I watched children play. I felt the sun on my face in daylight hours for what seemed like the first time in years. I turned back to face him. My doctor told me last year that my blood pressure was dangerously high. That was after my third kidney infection from working so many hours I wouldn't take bathroom breaks during crisis calls. His expression registered genuine shock. In 10 years, I took exactly 7 vacation days. 7. I canceled my grandmother's funeral because the Westerly project was in jeopardy. I broke off an engagement because I couldn't give my relationship the time it deserved while solving everyone else's problems. I didn't know. Of course you didn't. You never asked. None of you did. You just expected me to make everything work. And I did. Until I became too expensive. Compared to 6 fresh graduates, you could pay entry-level salaries. He had the decency to look ashamed. When Britt and Hal told me I was being terminated, do you know what I felt underneath the shock? Relief. Like putting down a weight I'd carried for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like not to carry it. Arthur stood slowly. I understand your anger. No, you don't, I interrupted. That's the point. You don't understand anything about me or what I did for your company. You never tried to. Then help me understand. His voice dropped, almost pleading. Please, hundreds of jobs are at stake now. That was playing dirty, and he knew it. The production line workers, the administrative staff, the warehouse teams, they weren't responsible for the executive decision that had disregarded my value. What specifically do you need? I asked finally. Relief flooded his face. The Richardson contract is the immediate crisis. We can't figure out how to meet their production requirements with the supply chain disruptions. Then there's the quality control issues on the Milwaukee line, and something about a European certification process that stalled completely. I held up my hand to stop the flood. And your solution is for me to come back and fix everything. Just like that. Yes. Whatever terms you want, name your price. I studied him. This powerful man, reduced to midnight begging in my apartment. The situation must be more desperate than even I realized. I'll need to think about it. Disappointment flickered across his face. We don't have much time. The board meets tomorrow at 4 to discuss emergency measures. Including what? He hesitated. Potential sale of divisions. Layoffs. I walked to the door, opening it. I'll call you tomorrow morning. He looked like he wanted to argue, but nodded instead, moving past me. At the door, he paused. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just for the company's sake, for how you were treated. After he left, I couldn't sleep. I paced my apartment, weighing options, considering angles. The company that had discarded me was now desperate for my return. The power dynamic had shifted completely. What exactly did I want? Not revenge, at least not the destructive kind that would hurt innocent employees. But accountability? Recognition? Yes, those I wanted. The next morning, I called Zoe. What's the real situation there? Her voice lowered to a whisper. Worse than you can imagine. They've lost access to the integrated tracking system. Nobody knows your passwords or how you built it. Richardson sent inspectors who found quality inconsistencies. The Milwaukee line had 3 emergency shutdowns this week. Everyone's panicking. After hanging up, I made another call to Tyson Richardson himself. Aubrey, he answered immediately. Tell me you're coming back to fix this mess. Not exactly, I replied, but I might have a proposition for you. At 3:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the emergency board meeting, I walked through Crawford Industries' front entrance. The security guard did a double take but waved me through. Nobody had bothered to remove my building access. In the lobby, Arthur Crawford waited anxiously, relief washing over his face when he spotted me. Thank God. The board's assembled. I cut him off. I'm not here as your employee. I'm not here as your employee. What? I handed him a thick folder. This contains my proposal. I suggest you review it with your board. His face clouded with confusion as he opened it, scanning the first page. His eyes widened, looking up at me in disbelief. This isn't possible. You can't seriously expect. The meeting starts in 10 minutes. I'll wait here for your answer. As he hurried toward the elevators, clutching my folder, I settled into one of the lobby chairs. A text message lit up my phone. Zoe, are the rumors true? Are you coming back? I smiled to myself, not responding. The board would be reading my terms right now. Arthur would be presenting them, knowing he had no choice but to accept. What I was about to create wasn't just a new position for myself. It was a complete restructuring of power, one that would ensure what happened to me would never happen to anyone else at Crawford Industries again. But first, they would need to agree to my terms. All of them. The next 30 minutes would determine not just my future, but the future of everyone who had ever been undervalued in their professional life. The elevator doors opened, and Arthur emerged, his face unreadable as he approached. The board has reviewed your proposal, he began. What he said next would change everything. The board has reviewed your proposal, he began, his expression unreadable. I remained seated, maintaining eye contact. The polished marble lobby suddenly felt like the negotiating ground it had become. Before I tell you their decision, I need to understand something, Arthur continued, lowering himself into the chair across from me. This isn't just about money for you, is it? No, I answered simply. Then what is it about, exactly? Value, recognition, and ensuring what happened to me never happens to anyone else. He nodded slowly. Your consulting fee structure is unprecedented. So was the situation you created. The board balked at the equity percentage. I expected they would. Arthur leaned forward. They've approved a modified version, 8% equity instead of 15. The board seat in 18 months, contingent on performance metrics we'd established together. He paused. And they rejected your demand for a new department under your leadership. I stood, smoothing my blazer, the first professional clothing I'd worn in a month. Then we don't have anything more to discuss. Good luck with your meeting. Panic flashed across his face as I turned toward the exit. Wait, please. That was just their initial response. I paused, but didn't turn back. I convinced them we need your full proposal. All of it. Now I turned, studying him. Even the oversight committee? He winced slightly. Even that. My proposal wasn't a simple employment offer. It was a complete restructuring of power at Crawford Industries. I would return not as an employee, but as an independent consultant with an equity stake, transitioning to a board position within a set time frame. I would create and lead a new integration strategy department, with authority crossing all divisions, staffed with people I chose, paid at rates I determined. Most radically, I demanded an oversight committee for all personnel decisions above a certain level, preventing exactly the kind of opaque termination process that had removed me. The committee would include representatives from multiple levels of the company, not just executives. The board authorized everything? I confirmed. Yes, Arthur replied, his expression revealing the battle it must have been, though some members threatened to resign over the Personnel Oversight Committee. Let them, I said calmly. His eyebrows rose. You really don't care if this breaks the company, do you? On the contrary, I'm saving it from itself. We returned to the executive floor together, a floor I'd rarely accessed in my previous decade at the company. As we approached the boardroom, Arthur paused. They're waiting for final confirmation. Before we go in, I need to know, are you doing this to hurt us, Aubrey? To watch us grovel before you pull the rug out? I considered his question carefully. No, I'm doing it because despite everything, I built systems I'm proud of, because hundreds of people who did nothing wrong depend on those systems working, and because if I control the terms, I can ensure proper value is recognized, not just for me, but for everyone whose contributions are invisible until they're gone. Relief softened his features. That's better than we deserve. Yes, I agreed. It is. The boardroom fell silent as we entered. 12 people in expensive suits stared at me, the woman they'd discarded without a second thought now holding their company's fate in her hands. I recognized most of them from company photos but had never met them personally. They hadn't considered me important enough to know. Miss Kane has accepted our counter-proposal, Arthur announced, taking his seat at the head of the table. A balding man halfway down the table cleared his throat, with the understanding that this arrangement is temporary until operations stabilize. No, Gregory, I corrected calmly, with the understanding that this represents a permanent restructuring of how Crawford Industries values its key personnel and institutional knowledge. His face reddened. You can't possibly. The Richardson contract renews in 11 days, I interrupted. You're currently unable to meet their quality specifications. 3 other major clients have paused orders. Your main production line has suffered multiple critical failures. Your stock has dropped 18% in a month. I smiled politely. Would you like me to continue listing the reasons why I can? In fact, possibly? The silence that followed was deafening. I'll need the agreement signed today, I continued. I start tomorrow, not as your employee, as your partner. Arthur slid papers across the table. The legal team prepared everything, per your specifications. I reviewed each page carefully, aware of the tense silence surrounding me. When satisfied, I signed with a flourish, then stood. Tomorrow morning, I'll meet with the remaining analysts to begin recovery procedures. I'll need full access reinstated to all systems immediately. I turned to Arthur, and I want Zoe promoted to Assistant Integration Director, effective immediately, with a compensation package we'll discuss privately. He nodded without hesitation. As I gathered the signed agreements, a woman near the end of the table, one of only 2 female board members, spoke up. Miss Kane, may I ask what made you agree to help us after how things ended? I considered my answer carefully, because true power isn't about destruction, it's about rebuilding on better terms. The next morning, I arrived at Crawford Industries at precisely 7:30 a.m., not as an employee rushing to solve everyone else's problems, but as a partner with clear boundaries and recognized value. The security guard greeted me with a smile and a newly printed access badge, one that opened every door in the building. In the elevator, 3 executives who had never acknowledged me before suddenly found me fascinating. We're so glad you've returned, Miss Kane, one offered nervously. I haven't returned, I corrected. I've arrived. The distinction wasn't just semantic. In my previous role, I'd been swimming upstream against organizational limitations, solving problems without the authority to prevent them. Now, I had both the responsibility and the power to implement structural changes. My first meeting was with the remaining analysts from the team that had supposedly replaced me. Their relief was palpable as I outlined our approach to stabilizing the Richardson contract. But we've tried everything, one protested. Their specifications are impossible with our current supply chain issues. Nothing's impossible, I replied, just underimagined. By noon, I had identified 3 critical failure points in the production sequencing that no one had noticed, invisible to anyone who hadn't spent years understanding the rhythms of our operations. By 3 p.m., I had drafted new protocols that accounted for supply chain realities while meeting Richardson's quality requirements. Tyson Richardson himself called me directly when he received my proposal. You did in 6 hours what they couldn't do in a month, he marveled. That's why you'll be dealing exclusively with me from now on, I replied, and why our new contract will include different terms. Name them, he said without hesitation. 2 days later, I presented the board with a renewed Richardson contract with better terms for Crawford Industries than they'd had in years. Their stunned expressions were worth every minute of the intense negotiations. How did you get Richardson to agree to these pricing adjustments? Gregory asked, bewildered. By understanding what they actually value versus what you thought they valued, I answered simply. Within 2 weeks, all critical operations had stabilized. Within a month, the stock had recovered its losses. Within 3 months, my new integration strategy department had transformed how information flowed through the company, breaking down silos that had caused costly redundancies for years. Most importantly, the Personnel Oversight Committee, now formalized in company bylaws, had already prevented 2 ill-considered terminations proposed by executives who couldn't see beyond spreadsheets to the human value involved. 6 months after my midnight conversation with Arthur Crawford, I sat across from him in what had once been a monthly formality but was now a genuine strategic partnership. The board vote for your seat is next week, he mentioned. It's going to be unanimous. I smiled. Even Gregory? Especially Gregory. Since you fixed the European certification process, he's become your biggest supporter. I leaned back in my chair. It was never about having a seat at the table, Arthur. It was about changing the table itself. Well, you've certainly done that, he acknowledged. Crawford Industries hasn't operated this efficiently in its entire history. What neither of us said aloud, though we both understood, was that my greatest revenge wasn't in humbling those who had undervalued me. It was in creating a system where value was recognized before it was lost, where institutional knowledge was respected as the asset it truly was, and where no one person could discard another without proper consideration of all they brought to the table. I hadn't just saved Crawford Industries. I'd transformed it into what it should have been all along. The true revenge wasn't in destruction. It was in reconstruction that made the old power structures obsolete. As I left Arthur's office that day, I passed the workspace where 3 new analysts were being trained by Zoe, now Director of Integration Development with her own equity package. They weren't just learning procedures, they were learning the why behind the how, understanding the relationships that made everything work. "You've built something remarkable here," Zoe said as we walked to the elevator together. "No," I corrected her with a smile. "We're building it, and this time, everyone knows exactly what it's worth." Thanks for staying with me through Aubrey's journey from undervalued employee to powerful changemaker. If her story resonated with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your workplace until something fell apart without you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about turning professional setbacks into opportunities. Have you ever been underestimated at work only to prove your worth later? Share your experience in the comments. I love hearing how others have navigated these challenging situations. Remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't walking away, it's walking back in through the front door on your own terms.